if you only look at the world through the lens of a neurotypical, then yeah, these are people who can't get it together. But if you can flip it and see the benefits across the entire continuum of how brains work, then you see the positives. Now think about your workplace. Tell me where you don't need more of that.
You're listening to Parenting with Impact, the podcast for parents like you, raising complex kids to become capable, independent adults, even in this complicated world. Each episode brings expert insights and real-life strategies to help you parent with confidence, calm, and clarity. Here are your hosts, Elaine and Diane.
Welcome back, everybody, to another conversation in the Parenting with Impact podcast. We are going to have a really interesting conversation today. Our guest is Kristen Pressner, and we're kind of shifting to it from a different lens. She comes to us live from Switzerland and from the corporate world, and it's just kind of an interesting and different spin on neurodiversity. So I'm really excited to get us started.
Well, thank you for having me. It's great to see you both.
It's truly a pleasure. This is really exciting. So, Diane, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, Kristen, I know you've got some stuff coming up that you're really focused on with neurodiversity. Talk a little bit about your lens of neurodiversity and how you got started and what's important about it for you.
Yeah, thanks for asking, Diane. I have to say, I work in human resources from a street cred perspective. I'm the global head of human resources for a large multi-billion-dollar multinational. And so I'm in the business of bringing out the best in people. It's what I do for a living and something I'm really good at and proud of. And what happened for me was I realized that my superpowers didn't seem to work in my own house.
Yeah.
And I found this so weird. And so the COVID pandemic kind of shined a light on it a little bit and helped accelerate some things. And I pulled the loose thread in the sweater and ultimately realized that everyone else in my house is actually neurodivergent. And I found myself wondering, how did I not see it? I'm a human resources professional. And I realized that, quite honestly, I had absolutely no idea what neurodivergence actually looks like in the wild. And I oftentimes
walk in my house for a day. Yeah, we got you covered.
Exactly. And I also realized that that what I tended to do was diagnose what was going on more as character flaws. They're lazy. They don't apply themselves. They don't care, which in retrospect now really hurts my heart. And it really made me want to do something about sharing what I'd learned so that other people who might be, in that kind of oblivious category that I was, can join the ranks of the people who actually have a better understanding.
I love that. What that makes me think about, and Diane, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, is particularly when we first started doing this, because Diane and I have been doing this for almost 15 years. And when we first started, we teach a class called Sanity School for Parents, which is coaching skills for parents, basically, neurodiversity informed. And parents, but also for teachers. And they would come to us after the first couple of classes in tears because they realized that no matter how well-intended they were, they had been saying things and treating kids in a way that was not helping them be their best self, to your point. Mm-hmm. And so there is this guilt in awareness that we kind of had to break down. And I'm curious how that showed up for you, how you navigated that.
Yeah, I have to say, that actually warms my heart a bit. They want my help helping them understand how they did not help, maybe how they hurt in the situation. And I think it's exactly that. I tend to be more action oriented. And once I realized that kind of everything I knew about neurodiversity was wrong, then, I set about getting my armchair PhD in neurodiversity and in our family's case in particular, ADHD, and really trying to understand some things. And as an outcome, together as a family, and any stories that I share are with the blessing of my family. And I think that's important to note. We together created this TEDx talk because we know that is a platform where we can help people to listen. And the talk is really a call to action to neurotypicals who are on the outside in that oblivious zone, an invitation to now know. And if you know, what's your responsibility, your obligation to do something about that? And so each of them has that teacher or coach or friend on their list where they want to send the talk in the end and be like, this explains me. And this is what I would have needed to be my best self. And we're not talking about people who are of a low standard and you're trying to get them to a slightly higher low standard. I always use the joke. It's such a cliche for people who understand ADHD, but I'm like, someone suggested looking into ADHD. I'm like, my kids can't have ADHD. Heck,
You're
one of
so
them can write a
smart.
12-page term paper the night before with no breaks with top marks. And of course, now I'm like, right, that is the hallmark of ADHD, right?
Yes.
But again, I didn't know how to recognize it. And I'm like, these kids are thriving. I've got kids who got into Ivy League schools, who've done their own TEDx talks, who've, graduated a year early. So there was all these really great examples of awesomeness of really, so what I
High
call,
achievers. Yeah.
yeah, really, really good at hard things and
Yeah.
really garbage at what I call easy things. And so I just found it so baffling. And I was like, who's the parent around here? Am I just a terrible parent? And then once we realized there was something biological that could cause this outcome, then for me, I was a woman on a mission to then say, okay, what should we do about it? Because we also know that ADHD and neurodiversity can come with negative consequences as well.
Right.
And I did see some of those comorbidities in my house, and I was worried for my family.
Yeah.
Well, and I want to take you back for a minute because you said something that I want to just highlight is it's easy to create stories about things that don't make any sense to us, right? It's just sort of, it doesn't make sense. And so we immediately go, oh, this must be what it is. And it sounds like that's part of what you did. It like, I need to have this make sense in my brain, so I'm going to label it. And how natural is it that we do that and how common?
Yeah. Yeah. And if I would just use myself as an example. I wouldn't dare to do it to anyone else. But then you start, I have 4 kids, so I also have more than the average pile of people to observe,
Right.
and a husband who is late diagnosed, and each one's different. And so again, I couldn't see patterns because it manifests so differently in each individual. And you're right, I was trying to sense make, and I couldn't make sense. So then you go, are you less clever than the other one? No, it doesn't seem like you're less clever, and again, I couldn't for the life of me make sense of it until I unraveled the mystery of how their brains work. And I always call it like learned how to hack them so their greatness can come out. And it required me to engage differently. And it required them to be able to understand their own brains and let go of some of the shame that's associated as well.
Exactly. So I want to dive in a little deeper. Let's double click on that for a minute, because what you just said, you gloss over as if everybody understands. And let's take a minute. We all do this, right?
Right.
Because we understand it so well. But you can have a house with 5 people with ADHD, and it will look like 5 different manifestations. So that, and that's just one aspect of neurodivergence. But one of the challenges to identify neurodivergence is that it looks very different in different people.
Oh, 100% that. And I have to say, I mean, maybe coming at it from another angle, because again, usually ADHD and neurodiversity comes with, a wonderful bonus of comorbidities like anxiety,
Right.
depression, eating disorders, things that can kill you. And so here I was in the throes of finding out 5 out of 6 people, everybody but me in my house, was not well.
Yeah.
And trying to get diagnoses and trying to figure out what was going on, and it manifesting very differently, individual by individual. And Diane, to your point, minute by minute.
Yeah.
And I'm just looking for the scaled way to solve for this, because I also have a big job and I'm trying to figure out how to solve for this kind of once and for all. What's the one thing I can do across all 5 of them?
Magic wand, like,
yes, the magic wand. And this is why I ended up deciding to do the TEDx talk, because I'm like, once I figure out what the magic wand is, I'm going to tell everybody, because I don't want anyone to have to suffer like I am. And I'll tell you what the magic wand is.
Okay.
To be a brain friend. And so in essence, and this is what I share in my TEDx talk, being a brain friend means recognizing all of our brains are different. They jumpstart differently. Generally speaking, neurotypicals are motivated by what's important. And if it's important, then it will jumpstart the motivation to take action, to get outcomes, train. But for someone with ADHD in my house, you can't get it jumpstarted with importance. Importance doesn't move them at all.
No.
But if I can hack their interest, then I can get motivation and actions and then outcomes. And see, the thing is, if I gave you, all 3 of us, a list of 10 things and we needed to put them in importance order, we would probably put them in the same-ish order. But if we put a list of interesting things, we would put them in all different order. And this is how I came to understand why it seems ever changing, almost like that whack-a-mole game at the fair of what I'm trying to do. But knowing that enables me to hack it. So a brain friend isn't judgy, is just curious about how to enable my partner to be more successful and to stop looking at everything through the lens of a neurotypical world. And I'll tell you this. What we say is we in a neurotypical world describe importance brains as orderly, dependable, and in control. And we therefore describe interest brains as all over the place, inconsistent, and out of control. They are not nice words.
Nope, they're not. And it feels so lousy.
Yes.
Right?
And the reality is, because this feels like the most important thing for me, because we're looking at it all wrong. And if we were to look at it actually through the lens of the gifts, then you wouldn't say all over the place. You would say able to focus on sudden, unexpected things. That's a good thing. You wouldn't say inconsistent. You would say able to change strategy, try new things, and respond quickly. That seems like the kind of thing this world needs. And then you wouldn't say out of control. You would say full of drive, because their body floods easily with adrenaline. And so if you flip the language, you see the benefits and the beauty, and that's what we're trying to amplify. And in my view, that's what being a brain friend does. It's a very small, relatively small effort on my part to bring out the best in my partner.
Mm. Well, and I love the orderly, dependable, and in control. It just says that those three things that we're looking for in human nature. Elaine is reminding me of the conversation we had in a podcast about trust, where we're talking about one of the things that is required to trust somebody. We were using the Brene Brown model of trust is dependability. And by definition, these humans are not dependable. And so it's a setup to assume that in order to trust somebody, they have to be this thing that they just are not by nature
or by
so
wiring.
much that. Yes,
right?
So much that. And I tell you, my poor husband, because his entire identity is person who can be counted on, Boy Scout, Mr. Dependable. And it was so incredible. Now that he, at 47, got a diagnosis and can look back retrospectively on his life, he's like, whoa, because if in the times that he wasn't dependable, it was amazing how his brain wrote a narrative about why that was to make it make sense to him and to others around him. And so all of a sudden, as I started pulling this loose thread in the sweater, I was like, I don't think you can be counted on. And like, that was the ultimate knife through the heart to him, because he wanted to be able to be counted on, but we had together to accept, in spite of how much he wants that, it's not as dependable as it is for somebody who it doesn't also have ADHD at play.
Well, and that's the nature of it, is part of the diagnosis of it is I can't get myself to do what it is I know I want to do. And that therein lies the paradox, the conflict. It's not that I don't want to remember to do whatever it is you've asked me to do, but that requires a different process to be able to.
Yeah, and this is the way I look at it as a neurotypical. How exhausting must that be? I force myself to do the thing. I got up this morning and took the walk and set my alarm extra early. And my mental model, and this was really the hard part, because my kids, there were glimmers. Mom, I have to read the same page over and over. Mom, I'm trying to listen to you, but my mind wanders. Mom. And every time my answer was the same. That happens to everybody sometimes.
You just need to try harder.
Yes, try harder. Exactly. Because I thought that their brains were like my brain. And now that I understand that I might have to get up and stretch my legs once every couple of hours, but they would have to get up and stretch their legs 10 times a minute. Now it's a scaled problem. Now I understand. And so my mental model is, if they say something's hard, it's 600 times harder than it is for me.
Oh, beautiful.
So let's dig into that when we come back from a break.
Do you recognize current ADHD interventions fall short? At Dig Coaching, we have developed a new field of engineering and a new ADHD intervention called Cognitive Ergonomics from the Inside Out. To learn more, visit cognitive-ergonomics.com.
Welcome back, everybody. Our guest is Kristen Pressner. We are talking about the awareness and the understanding of neurodiversity and how that plays out at work and at home, and the hacks that neurotypicals can understand and do to really shift what did you say? It's a relatively small effort on my part to bring out the best in my partner. What a beautiful awareness that is. And you've talked about not using non-judgment, using curiosity. Those of you in our community who are listening will hear a lot of what she's talking about are exactly what we teach in this coach approach, because it's about shifting the way we be with neurodiversity.
Well, and the third one that
narrative.
Yeah, the third one that I just want to highlight, the language we use, Kristen, is assuming best intention, right? And that sounds like part of what's going on underneath this. You were just telling a story about your husband. But so dig in a little bit about that moment of aha for you is like, okay, I got to do this differently when I'm engaging with my partner, my kids. What was some of that awareness?
Yeah, it was funny. We travel all around Europe, and I remember once we went on holiday with an older family member, and I was annoyed because I was trying to get 10,000 steps a day, and they walked really, really slowly.
Yeah.
And so I would find myself at like 10 p.m. having to get my steps because we didn't cover much ground. And I was getting so annoyed. And then I came across, luckily, this article that said, if you want to be happy on holiday, remember you're only as fast as your slowest member. And I was like, that is the most obvious, powerful thing I've ever heard, because I just accepted that, not that someone didn't keep up with the rest of us who were fast, they were the pace setter.
Right.
And I apply that a bit in my life, that mental model. And another one, which is, this is biological. This isn't a choice. It's not a character flaw. This is biological. It's neurotransmitters, it's prefrontal cortex that are indisputably biologically different. If my husband had cancer, would I be like, hey, man, be less cancer-y? No. So my husband has ADHD. So I have a responsibility as someone who loves him and has built a life with him and 4 children with him to meet him in the most reasonable place if I want to stay married in this loving relationship. And so the combination of those two things kind of led me to being a brain friend. Again, I'm not talking about turning myself into a pretzel every single minute for everybody else. But in HR, we have this notion of reasonable accommodations. You do something reasonable to accommodate someone. If it's unreasonable, you don't have to do it. And I give you an example. My husband every single day would leave his wet towel on my half of the bed when he would get dressed in the morning. Drove me nuts. Every day. I can't tell you how many times we talked about it.
Oh, we know. Remember what example we get from parents besides not brushing teeth is the wet towel or the towel on the floor.
I had no idea. I didn't know this was an ADHD. So I was really, before his diagnosis, I was like, do you not love me? Can you not change your process? Like,
what's going on?
The towel became the thing in our marriage, And then once I understood about his diagnosis and we kind of unpacked it a little bit, he's like, I have really good intentions to take my towel, but there's something about getting ready in the morning that gets my mind down the train of what's coming that I forget my towel every day. And so I just made a deal with myself that as a brain friend, like I have wind in my back. Life is easier for me. He has wind in his face. Life is harder for him. A reasonable accommodation is when I find the towel on my half of the bed, I pick it up and hang it up.
Yeah, I'm with you. And yet so many people find resentment in that little action. Right. It's really easy to build and hold on to resentment that why can't they just?
Well, some days when I'm not feeling hanging it up, I just move it to his side of the bed.
I was going to say, do you move it to his side of the bed? Snarky Diane would do that too.
And it's fair.
Yeah.
Right?
And my family knows we use the brain friend language. And I think it does because sometimes, my adult children are like, why are you, like I'll say to my son forgets to eat. And so I'll come in around 8 p.m. and be like, here's a sandwich. And he feels embarrassed that he didn't feed himself. And he feels embarrassed that his mom has to bring food. And I'm like, this is what a brain friend does. There's no judgment here. I want the awesomeness of you to come out and you forget to eat. What a brain friend does is brings a sandwich when it's time to eat. And I think we built that language into our house. And I think it's so important. But I also reserve the right, because there's 5 of them and 1 of me.
Yeah.
I reserve the right about once a week to lose my garbage and just say, I can't do it right now. I cannot be brain friendly for this 5 minutes because it's too much for me.
Yeah. Yeah. So we have that in my house and we call it mise en place. And that is we go and I tell, particularly when the kids were younger and still living in the house. And when I hit my limit, I would call mise en place. We would turn on music for 10 minutes and everybody would just start putting stuff away. And it was just this deal we had that I'm going to surrender what I can surrender. And then at some point when it hits the threshold where the clutter was more than I could be with because I'm also neurodivergent, then we kind of had this deal, right? And it was part of the brain friendliness is we got to meet everybody's brain. And for you're not picking up after yourself. And that's because you leave this wake. The clutter puts me over the edge. And so we have to meet everybody's needs.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm going to steal that.
Mise en place was great. So I know we want to start wrapping the conversation, but I don't want to start wrapping the conversation because it's too interesting. Let's take a minute and say, how can people find out more about you? And then let's come back and finish the conversation about that.
Okay. Well, unlike most of the experts you probably have on the show, I'm just an executive who happens to be passionate about this topic. And so I would say my gift, hopefully, to the world together with my family is to do this TEDx talk to try to break through to the neurotypicals who might be oblivious to how neurodivergent shows up. And I would say our important role in that. So first and foremost, I would say hop on YouTube and search for Kristen Pressner, KRI.
We'll put the link in the
fabulous.
TEDx.
Okay, fabulous. And watch my TEDx talk and share it with people who you think would benefit from better understanding neurodiversity and in particular what we can do to unleash the potential in everybody. Or you can find me on LinkedIn or at kristenpressner.com.
Awesome. All right. And we will have all that in the show notes, everybody. So, but we have time. I don't want to shortcut this, but I want to come back and say, like, you are a passionate woman, executive, thought leader in this arena. What do you think is really most important for our community, for everybody to understand? What's the essence of this that you hope people will take away from this conversation today?
Yeah, I think what worries me the most is that hard-won lessons learned in the Pressner house will stay in the Pressner house. And my family really wishes that we could pay forward to the rest of the world what we've learned with a call to action and a breakthrough into the neurotypical community. This is not just a parenting topic, although it's massively a parenting and a family topic. It's a workplace topic. It's a sports team topic. It's a school topic. It's anywhere there are humans. And so I personally feel like this world and this world's problems and this complexity that we face needs all the brains.
Yeah.
And if we're holding back the potential of some of the brains because the brains don't understand themselves, they don't know how to hack themselves to get the right outcome, the comorbidities are taking over and holding back all that potential because people aren't understood, because neurotypicals are judging them against the wrong yardstick or not doing what I would consider minor interventions that can bring out their benefit. Like, what are we thinking? Look around. We could surely use all the brains. And when I look at the superpowers that neurodiverse brains have, we need more of that.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's just how do we get the word out so that we can rewrite this narrative that the world is only for neurotypicals?
Well, and what's coming up for me immediately when you say that, Kristen, and a lot of the parents that are listening to this podcast get what you said, and they live in a world that feels like the world doesn't get it. The school doesn't get it. The church doesn't get it. The sports coach doesn't get it. And so let's speak into that a little bit.
Yeah. Been there. I was also the person who didn't get it. And what I would say is I'm hoping to give a phraseology for people to invite others into curiosity and understanding, which is the why behind Brain Friend. And so if people better understand their own brains, they can ask for a brain friend. And for people who want to be an ally for neurodivergence, they can offer to be a brain friend. And again, you can be a brain friend to anyone. At its core, this is just talking about being an inclusive, curious person.
Yeah.
And whether you're neurotypical, neurodivergent, or whatever, if there are things that I can do to bring out the best in you, and they're not that big of a deal for me to do, and they're really super helpful for you, why wouldn't I do them?
Mm-hmm.
And so the invitation is to give a language to everyone on how we can have a collective way of thinking and talking about being more inclusive and bringing out the best in everyone.
So can we go back, building on that, to something Diane was talking about earlier, is for those who want to be inclusive, I hear that message. But then there are those who are still, on some level, they don't understand it and they do find it not trustworthy, unreliable. I can't trust you too. How do I? So can we speak a little bit to the people who have a more linear way of being, who may expect things to be a certain way and don't have a comfort with those of us who are wired differently? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. It's a tricky one because I think these are big problems and the world's wired in a particular way. And until we solve for that, it almost feels like we can't move. And so I'm a firm believer in getting a movement of the willing and a coalition of the willing. But I could tell you as an employer, with each generation, the balance of power, if you will, in the workplace shifts. Baby boomers, there were lots and lots of them. And so they had to basically gyrate themselves to get great opportunities in the workplace. But with the more recent generations, there's too few of them. And so there's a war for talent, and the talent gets to call the shots. And so, I don't know about you all, but my young adult children, they're not going to be told who they need to be, how they need to show up. They are who they are. And they're much more confident in themselves than I ever was at that age. And so I actually think that someone said to me the other day, the solution is to get all these old people out and let the kids take over. And maybe they're not wrong, but what I can say is we probably can't solve everything, but we can solve a lot. Because my mother always used to say, if everyone does a little, no one does a lot. And it was my mantra of raising 4 kids. If everyone does a little, no one does a lot. And it scales here. If every one of us just does a little, we could rewrite the fabric of the way our societies, schools, churches, etc. are built.
That's beautiful. So what about in the workplace? Like, how do you, because you're in HR, how do you guide managers in the workplace who may not be as well schooled in this? What are some of the little steps that might begin to move the needle?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I asked my kids this too, because I'm quite curious about what are those reasonable accommodations that really could go a long way. And what I would say is, and this is partly why I wanted to do the talk, is because I think a lot of people at my work are going to listen to it. And so
I can imagine.
And then we have a common understanding from which to have a conversation. But again, this isn't about being nice to poor people who are not that good at their jobs. This is about unleashing things like the ability to focus on sudden unexpected things in a wildly changing workplace, the ability to change strategy when it's called for, try new things and respond quickly. I do that daily. The ability to have a body that's flooded easily with adrenaline to power itself through different things. These are things we need in the workplace. So I would first come at it from the angle of, if you want more of that, you might need to do more of this. And so just relatively small things like, it was cute. My son was interviewing for a job recently and they were trying to be neurodiverse friendly. And they said, would it be helpful for you if you could pick your starting hours or work from home sometimes? And he was like, no, please, no, I need the structure. He's like, make me come in
there at a certain time.
Exactly. And this is the thing. There's no magic recipe or magic wand for what's going to work. The person needs to be introspective enough to understand what helps them and hurts them. And then they need to be able to ask for it. And then we need to determine, is that reasonable or is it unreasonable? And so what I can say is, can we have somebody who never, ever, ever, never shows up in the office? Not for most jobs. Would it be possible to put on noise canceling headphones if they need to focus in an open office setup? Sure, why not?
Yeah. Well, and I think so. The trick is to like, what we often say is our job is to help parents understand their kids well enough for them to be able to help their kids understand themselves well enough to learn to manage themselves. And so a lot of what you're speaking to is that the understanding of it is what allows you to be in the process of problem solving for each individual issue as it comes up. But you have to be willing to see that as an opportunity, not as an obstacle.
Yeah. Willing to see that it's not a deficit, right? It's just sort of, again, it's the double edge of that, right? Sorry, Kristen.
Exactly. Everything is 2 sides of the same coin, right? And so, but I think this is what feels important to me, is for people to recognize, if you only look at the world through the lens of a neurotypical, then these are people who can't get it together and are out of control and, all of the negative things. But if you can flip it and see the benefits across the entire continuum of how brains work, I think the important thing in the workplace is to understand that if we only look at things through the neurotypical lens, then yeah, we'll describe neurodivergences all over the place, inconsistent and out of control. But if you look at them through the lens of the good that they bring, not only through the lens of a neurotypical world, then you see the positives. And those positives, the ability to focus on unexpected sudden things, the ability to change strategy, try new things, the ability to get that drive that comes from being flooded easily with adrenaline, that enables unique thinking that reveals hidden connections, to be flexible, resilient, and quick to master new things, and to be intensely imaginative and creative. Now think about your workplace. Tell me where you don't need more of that.
I love that. Thank you. I needed this today. It's a great affirmation and reminder. I was one of those ADDers who wasn't diagnosed till I was in my 40s. And I grew up thinking I was stupid. And everybody kept telling me I was smart, and I thought I was fooling them all. And it wasn't until I was diagnosed that I was able to look back in my life and see how much I had done to accommodate, how much how I had made it work despite. And so I really want to applaud and acknowledge what you're doing, because I know that we do this because we don't want kids to grow up feeling the way that I felt, and my husband felt, and my kids did for the first 10 years. And you don't want people to grow up the way your kids felt when you didn't understand. So thank you for doing this.
Thank you both. I mean, this is important work. And just think of all of the potential that's being left on the table that could be released with this work.
Yeah. Beautiful. So anything else you want to throw in before we ask you your favorite quote or motto? Anything else you want to wrap up this conversation for yourself?
No, I would just say what my mother says. Everyone does a little, so no one does a lot. And think about what's the little thing that you could do that could have a big impact in the way you interact with others in the world, because I think the world would be a much, much better place.
I love that.
Yeah. And is that your favorite quote or motto?
I brought another one. It's a Ken Blanchard quote, the co-author of The 1 Minute Manager, and it's, "None of us is as smart as all of us." And it's just a reminder, it takes all the brains to solve the world's problems. None of us is as smart as all of us.
I love that. Thank you.
Kristen, thank you so much for being with us. What a delightful conversation. I'm so excited for your movement and to see where it goes, and to have you on our bandwagon, it feels like, and
vice versa.
Vice versa.
We're right here with you.
Thank you both so much for the opportunity. I'm really passionate about the work that you do, and it was an honor to be on the show. Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate it. And to those of you listening,
so take a minute before we close and reflect on the conversation today. What's one nugget? What's one insight you want to take from our conversation with Kristen today back into your life, back into your home, back into your work? What's that?
What's your aha? What is it that you can bring forward with you in the coming weeks to really begin to shift, or as we say, move the needle just a little bit in your world, whatever that is for you? And as always, everyone, thank you for what you're doing for yourselves and for your kids. As this conversation evidenced better than anything could, at the end of the day, it makes an enormous difference. Take care, everybody.
You've been listening to the Parenting with Impact podcast with Elaine and Diane. For more information on the Impact Parents community or to join Sanity School for Parents, please visit impactparents.com. If you like what you've heard, please share this podcast with friends who need similar guidance and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.